very good evening to everyone present here tonight. My name is Brian and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. As we'd like to continue improving your experience with us, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during this broadcast. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below. For those of you joining us from YouTube, please type your questions down in the live chat down below. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the YouTube channel. Tonight's seminar features Mr. Tony Shorrocks, with his topic being Developing a Musician's Learning Style and Self-Agency. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice you have for all of us tonight is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Mr. Shorrocks join in as our guest for tonight. I hope you will all join me in giving him a warm welcome. Mr. Tony Shorrocks is an instrumental practitioner and educator with over 40 years of experience. He has performed with various renowned orchestras such as the BBC Northern Symphony Orchestra, the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, and the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. His experience also includes chamber music performances with groups such as the Adriatica Sinfonica, the Ensemble Quartetto Montefiore Piano Quartet, as well as in using period instruments with groups such as the Sprezzatura, the English Baritone Trio, and the Sonatas a Tre. Moreover, he has performed on pop music tours alongside various prestigious figures of the music industry, such as Elaine Page, Dame Shirley Bassey, and the late Sir George Shearing. His teaching experience started at the College of Ripon and York St. John. He then moved to a position at the Liverpool Hope University and has since 1995 moved to the Liverpool University, where he was appointed as head of performance a year later. He has directed and conducted the Liverpool University Symphony and Chamber Orchestras for 20 years, organizing tours to other parts of Europe. Aside from teaching instrumental learners, Mr. Shorrocks has also been actively involved with the development of instrumental teachers since 1995, when ABISM had started the Certificate of Teaching course. He was invited to become a mentor to groups of students in Manchester, Birmingham, and Sheffield for the next 20 years. He has also been asked to organize professional development training days to music services in various regions of the United Kingdom. Additionally, his success in developing an undergraduate performance course at the university enabled him to develop a master's level course, which combines both performance and pedagogy aspects. He currently serves as the artistic director of the International Youth Orchestra project named Music, a Bridge Between People in Kosovo and Italy, which brings together orchestral members from 12 Mediterranean countries, as well as being a consultant to a teaching studio in Beijing named Lavine. His coaching expertise had also brought him to the other institutions such as Musical Passages in France and the Dartington International Summer School. So without further ado, once again, a very good afternoon to Mr. Shorrocks. Thank you so much for joining us on this day.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So to start tonight's interview, what can you tell us about the videos that we were just watching?
The first one was a recording of the BBC Philharmonic, which was the later name for the BBC Northern Symphony Orchestra. And I wanted to illustrate to people who center their community around your orchestra how the sort of things can arise. When I was 7, for some reason, at primary school, I said I wanted to learn the viola. And I can only think that I saw the chart of the orchestra on the wall of the primary school. And I made the connection that this was the bunch of people that made the sounds my father, then discovering classical music, played on his record player in the evenings. So I thought, well, how do you get to be in the center of that? So this 7-year-old child didn't know what a viola was, but he said he wanted to learn the viola. So they thought that was so unusual. The next I knew, there was a viola under my chin. By the time I was 14, I used to come home from school, secondary school, after having attempted to study history or physics or whatever, turn on the BBC radio, which was the classical music channel, BBC Radio 3, and I could always tell if it was the BBC Northern Symphony Orchestra or not. It had a particular style of playing, a particular color of playing. Perhaps I think orchestras in those days had greater variety of styles than they do these days, partly as a result of the fact that we now live in a globalized world. We can all accommodate what we do and match each other. But actually, I think what I was hearing, and I hope what you heard in that, was the energy, the weight of the sound, and the instinctive ensemble. And it was always so good. And then by the time I was 21, I managed to pass an audition and started playing with them. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that was my introduction to professional playing at the age of 21. I was far too young. And from then on, just the other clip, the pop music, the Dusty Springfield clip, that was because by the time you get to an orchestra, lots of people in the orchestra also do other things. They are a resource, a reservoir of knowledge and ability. And so they might come up to you and say, what are you doing on Saturday? You want to come and play here, and so on. And somebody said, well, do you want to come do a recording? Do you want, I've got a date. I need some players to play on Top of the Pops, which meant getting up at 4 in the morning and driving to London to do the recording on the Tuesday. It went out on the Thursday. So you just say yes, yeah, I'll do that. And that's what it was like for perhaps 15, 20 years of my life before I started doing a lot more teaching and developing the university course. So those are the two sides of my playing experience I wanted you to see.
All right. Well, you've definitely come a long way from back when you joined, back when you were 21. So, yeah, based on your profile.
All right, if I know, yeah, the white hair, yeah.
All right. Well, you attribute yourself as someone who teaches focusing more on the person operating the instrument rather than the instrument itself. Would you care to elaborate on this further?
Forgive me for being inevitably slightly facetious, but the mistakes are in the operative, not in the violin or any other instrument. So therefore, in my teaching, I've always focused on making sure it is the operative, if you like, the machinery operative, the instrumental operator, the player, who does the changes, who does the learning. But that just strikes me as being so obvious. Perhaps we could all get back to thinking that. Who are we teaching? What are we teaching? We're teaching the person through the medium of the instrument, through the medium of music, through the medium of the violin. I've got a few lines. I don't know if people who are watching have seen or have knowledge of the website, but my website starts off with the statement that teaching is not telling. Telling is not doing teaching. We learn what we experience. So a teacher's job is to get the pupil, the person, to gain the experience which enables them to then play. And it just comes from that, really.
All right. So, have you applied this teaching approach to other instruments other than just string instruments?
Yes, very much so, because at university, when I was developing the course there, that was exactly what I was trying to get people to realize. There are various ways in that one can help people understand their own learning, because in the end, we learn when we practice. A teacher merely sort of brings to your attention that which you have to learn, that which you have to internalize and gain instinct, second nature over. And what I developed was a system whereby somebody learning, if they keep a detailed practice diary, and this is not just a record of I did practice on Tuesday, but actually to decide what are the problems in the practicing, what are the problems in their playing, and therefore how do I solve them? It takes quite a long time. And I used to send people around other practice rooms when other people were practicing, who is practicing well and who is not practicing well. The people who were practicing well were the people who had large silences in their practicing, because that was when they were doing the work. That was when they were doing the learning. They were thinking about things. They were trying to solve problems. And writing it down is one of the ways in which one can articulate the problems, and then one can begin to work out ways of doing it and refer back to it the next day or in a week's time or whenever. So I developed a whole structure of to enable people to learn, just in terms of using a musical instrument as the vehicle for learning. And this has been extremely constructive and useful. I think a lot of people do this without realizing it. But the way to structure it and discover that that is what we do, and people who are good at learning, they do this instinctively, and the rest of us can actually gain a huge advantage from making it conscious and overt. They make it obvious and do it patiently and in a studied sort of way. So just that, really.
All right. Well, it definitely sounds like your course focuses a lot on like the self-reflection aspect of of learning. So yeah, I mean, it sounds very interesting there. Um, so yeah. As I've seen on your profile, you mentioned something called self-agency. So exactly what is self-agency, and how does it relate to the instrumental industry?
I think self-agency is one of these fashionable terms, but actually in this case, I think the fashionable term is quite useful. It means essentially that you are enabling yourself. You have the agency, the ability, and you're doing that for yourself. And that use of the notebook, the practice diary, as I called it, was a huge part of the gaining of self-agency. Essentially, you get conscious of what you're doing, and you can then enable yourself to do what you're setting out to do. Two things on that. If one has a lesson, one is being told what to do. Actually, we're all different. We all construct the world according to our experiences and our desires. And in order to be able to connect that which you are told with your own individuality is an important part of learning. And as a musician, we by and large teach in one-to-one situations, and it's highlighted that we need to actually do this when we're learning in one-to-one, rather than just trying to do what we're told. I've got a few other, excuse me, if I can look at some notes about this.
Okay.
We're actually getting to be conscious. We get control over our own learning, and that's the important thing, because without that, you end up practicing not knowing quite what you're trying to do or what you're supposed to be doing. It becomes actually quite a negative experience. And don't forget, we learn what you experience. So if you gain conscious control over it, you can actually discover you're making progress. For example, if I practice on a Tuesday, I hope that I'm not starting in the same place that I started on Monday. I hope that the work I did on Monday in the practice has made changes. So it comes down to the 7-word conundrum, which is practice makes permanent. It's never made perfect and never will. So let's change that. Practice makes permanent, but practice is changed. And essentially, that's the conundrum. That's the paradox of practice. What we're going to do, we're going to make permanent, but actually practicing is growing, is making changes. So in the end, self-agency in that context, it just highlights the fact that learning and self-agency is about understanding our individual, unique learning processes. A teacher can help, surely. Listening to other things and experiencing other things can help. But in the end, we all make sense of the world our own way.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that insight. Thanks for sharing your insights on the whole self-agency aspect. So how exactly does one achieve self-agency? Like, do you have any key pointers on accomplishing this feat?
2 words, actually: stop and think. Too often, if people, a parent, for example, might say, I didn't hear you playing all the time when you were practicing. Well, good. I'm hoping that the rest of the time when you're not being heard, you're doing some thinking, but doing is not learning. Doing is just making something permanent. Yeah, that's a part of it. But what are you making permanent? You can make something wrong with permanent, and that means it's more difficult to learn and get change and get better afterwards. So then you have to think, what is the practicing? How can we gain that self-awareness? How can we gain that stop, think? There are various examples I've met in other parts of work. I was talking to an engineer from the Toyota car factory, of all things. And we think, what's the relationship between that and music? It's usually the same. They make cars. They want to make them right. They don't want to have to recall 5,000 cars that were made that week. So if any one of those people on that production line thinks there's a problem, they press a button, stop. And then they think, what was it you saw? What was not fitting in? The steering was not working properly. The steering rack, the bit of machinery is not fitting in. Why is it not fitting in? It's the same process. What's the problem? Solves the problem. But before you get there, you've got to say stop. So the two words I would suggest we can all use when you're learning, and perhaps as teachers we can allow pupils to do, stop, think. And interestingly, every time I've seen other teachers teach, one of the things I've learned as observing other people's teaching is a teacher who is good allows the pupil time to think. There is silence, and in that silence is when the pupil is learning. I had one pupil doing the master's course at university who told a story of, I think, a 12-year-old lad who was doing some singing, and she, like all of us as teachers, was talking too much. And the lad was writing it down in his book, and he came out with the incredible line, "Be quiet, you're stopping me learning." And he was quite right. She was distracting him from doing the thinking.
Okay. Well, definitely gives me a lot to think about, because yeah, it would distract the student from actually like reflecting on their
Yes,
own thoughts and stuff. So yeah.
and all of us as teachers think we're doing better teaching if we're forever giving out information. Well, yes, except we can't give out too much information. I can tell you how to play the violin in 10 minutes. It might take you 10 years, but the rest of the time is how you have put it into your understanding and your words and have made that which works permanent for you. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that would definitely give the audience a lot of thought, like a lot of things to think about. So yeah. Before we move on forward, though, I would just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions, just feel free to leave them in the Q&A section or in the Zoom or in the YouTube live chat. So yeah. So yeah.
And by the way, let's just take that one stage further. If anyone wants to ask me questions separately after they have had time to think, I'd welcome it.
All right.
So please give them my email address.
Yep, sure. I'll leave it in the YouTube chat and in the Zoom chat in a while. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So moving on. So with your work on the professional development of individuals as instrumental teachers, what could you advise for aspiring teachers?
Aspiring teachers, I've got 4 points. First of all of us, before we start teaching, have to unpick our own learning experience. I say that because it's no use any one of us as teachers saying, my teacher said so-and-so. I'm sure your teacher said that. And it made sense at the time. It made a lot of sense at the time, which is why you're bringing it up. But to the person we're attempting to teach, it is meaningless. We have to be that person. We have to become the person who makes immense sense to the pupil. We can't just do it by repeating and parroting. Teaching is not telling. So above all, unpick, understand how you've been taught. And hopefully you've been taught by several people. You will have different experiences, and it won't just be instrumental learning. How are you taught to drive? How are you taught to use the computer? In my case, I'm a dreadful pupil, as you know only too well. So how have I been taught that? I've been taught that by good people. I still don't understand it. It's my problem, but nonetheless, I have to think about how I was taught. I can't then quote other people about what I was told. So unpick your previous learning. Learning and teaching are a symbiotic relationship between the two. We never stop learning, and we keep on changing and developing our teaching. And then when you are teaching, I've got 3 points which I think are very important and come from a lot of witnessing of other people's teaching. Above all, listen to the people. The more I teach, and the more I teach teaching, instrumental teaching, the more I find myself saying, listen, observe the pupil. Is it making sense for them? Are they understanding? Do they want to do it? If not, why not? Don't ask directly. Teaching is not telling. Teaching is not saying things. You actually have to observe the body language, listen and observe. Second main point, a question for all teachers: do we allow an adequate degree of correct repetition? For example, let's say a pupil gets it wrong 7 times and then something is understood, they get it right once. What do we as teachers do? We say, good, well done, and we move on to the next point. They've got it wrong 7 times and right once. What are the chances of getting it right the next time? Pretty thin, actually. So they just got it right. I'm sure they'd like to do that again. That indicates and increases enjoyment, achievement, satisfaction. So an adequate amount of correct repetition. I find myself saying that as a comment on so many people's lessons. And that degree and amount of correct repetition may be different for each pupil. It's your job as a teacher to know how much is the correct amount for each pupil. Some people get it right twice and say, right, I've got that now, let's get on, do the next thing. Some people might say, I really enjoy doing that. They want to live there. They want to have that affirmation that they've got something right. And in the end, the third point, perhaps the most important, because it keeps on feeding our teaching, is at the end of every lesson, you, teacher, keep your own notebook and write down the answer to the question, what was the pupil's experience of that lesson? What was their takeaway experience of the lesson? And then that puts you away from the role of the teacher. It puts you, hopefully, into the role of the pupil, and you can understand how effective has your teaching been. So those are my points. Unpick your own. Think about the actual experience the kid has, or the pupil, sorry.
All right. Well, thanks for that. Before I think, I think that sort of covers that. Would you mind sharing some general pointers regarding making the most out of learning experiences, such as like being in an orchestra or even like your one-on-one lessons?
So the question.
Oh, sorry. Would you mind sharing some general pointers regarding how to make the most out of these learning experiences, like being in an orchestra, like when you practice in an orchestra, or even like doing one-on-one lessons?
Yes, it's not just about the doing, it's about the thinking and the experience of it. And no one person's point of view is absolute. One should always be open. There is nothing from which we cannot learn, is perhaps as close as I've ever got to a philosophy. Even from people I disagree with, perhaps even people I dislike. No, they are a genuine person in their own right. There will be a reason why they say that, why they think that, while they're behaving that way. Always, always, always to remain open to other things. Even though in the end one might say, well, no, that's not for me. But actually you can't know that until you've explored it. It requires a sort of security in oneself, because too much of the world seems to be built on people's insecurity and the reaction they have, the knee-jerk reaction they have against other things which are not for them. Not convinced, they know they're not for them. So you want to be able to be open to a new way of playing a piece of music, a new way of phrasing, or all the rest of it. And you should be able to do all those things. Of course, an awful lot of people refuse to do that because they can't do it. Well, no, actually, that's your job, is to remain open so you can enable yourself to learn how to do that. And then you can decide. So just to be open, really, always.
All right. No, thanks for sharing that first. So yeah, before we move on to the next question, we did manage to find this picture on your Facebook page. So just wanted to bring it up, hoping that you could share some points, share some things about it. So what can you share about this ensemble that you were part of?
Oh, that's an ensemble I have played with for 10 years. There are three fantastic Italian musicians. You can find, if you put into YouTube, Marcello De Font, the violinist. I think the same is true of Sebastiano, the pianist, and uh, Sebastiano, the cellist, sorry, and Giacomo, the pianist. Sebastiano is perhaps the best musician I have ever worked with or heard. He's extraordinary. He's one of the two cellists who plays Baroque period instruments, Baroque period cellos for La Scala Opera House in Milan. He's quite a phenomenal musician. And for some reason, their piano trio, called the Arte Piano Trio, they get me in to play the viola. So we have a piano quartet, which is a tremendous repertoire, all the way from Mozart up to 20th century music. And we played in France, Italy, Germany, I think, Spain, England. And it's a wonderful music making. It's some of the highest music making I have ever been involved in. I don't ask why they need me or want me. I just say yes.
I'm glad that you enjoyed the experience with them. Then
It's
you also
magnificent.
sorry.
And it's magnificent to think that at my age, I'm getting these wonderful new experiences, keeping me alive as a musician and always looking forward to the next day. It's amazing.
You definitely also look a lot younger in this photo as well, by the way.
That's what, sorry?
You also look a lot younger in this photo, by the way.
All right, all right, all right. Rub it in. Yeah, why not? Yeah.
All right. So yeah, with that we have yep, we'll move on to our next question. So with the current situation with the pandemic affecting learning and teaching opportunities across the globe, how would you suggest both instrumental learners and teachers make the most of the situation?
Oh, it's a can be a real problem. I have discovered in my own teaching online that I am falling back into saying too much, if you like, working too hard, and not letting pupils do the thinking in the silences, which we talked about earlier, not giving them adequate time to write in their practice diaries. And I think I'm doing it because the camera that I'm looking into is not able to follow the movements of the pupil. If I had a live pupil in this room here where I am now, I would be watching them, observing them, like I said to start with, really closely. And when I saw them writing in their practice diary to make a note about how something should go, what they should practice, I would know to shut up. I would know not to distract them. I would know to allow them to do the thinking and so on. But because that doesn't happen on these internet things, the camera doesn't follow my head, my eyesight. I want it to look down there and it can't. I notice that I'm talking too much. But at the same time, it does mean that if one can have the self discipline to do that, it is bringing to my attention the fact that I've got to shut up. I've got to say something. I've got to see sufficient to see when the pupil is wanting to do the thinking, wanting to do the change in their own head and write it down so they can practice it tomorrow. And that has been quite a lesson for me. As well as that, I think that when all this pandemic stuff is over, we are going to start playing with each other. And I think we need to be aware that that means that we will have to revise our awareness of other players. I know as a musician that there can be no higher compliment from somebody else other than to be described as an aware musician. That's somebody you want to play with, somebody who's responsive, somebody who you can make music with. You know, the words mean what they say. You are making something, you're creating something. And that is not something which I have yet found possible, no matter how much Zoom, WhatsApp, or WeChat conversations I have across the globe. And that is going to be something we will need to revise and refresh. And perhaps that's an opportunity to know that that is coming, that when we get back to being able to work together live, we're going to carry on doing some of this stuff across 7 time zones as we are doing today. But when we get back to being able to play and work with each other, we need to work at that thing about being aware of each other and each other's music making and contribution to music.
All right. Well, thanks for that. I'm sure like our audience and even our own like the JPO will definitely like put that into more thought like once everything does go back to normal. So yeah. Before we move on to our last question for the day, I just want to remind our audience that if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A section for Zoom, and for those of you in YouTube, please leave them in the YouTube live chat. So yeah. The last question I have for you today would be one from the JPO. So as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra, or the JPO, has involved itself in a variety of activities. So on behalf of the JPO, we would like to ask your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, we would also like to ask what would you suggest that the JPO and its members do to further improve itself?
Well, it strikes me that by using as the core an orchestra, you are then taking what an orchestra does and expanding it in a wonderful way, actually. If you play music together, essentially what you're doing is you are creating community. I have no idea what it means or says, but I know that the act of playing music together generates community. And by then taking it out and doing all the outreach you're doing all the other things, doing this sort of conversation, that is exactly what you're using. You're using the sense of community. And it happens throughout music making, throughout human experience, in every culture in the world, in every country in the world, that this is what music does. It generates community in a way which I'm not sure I know of anything else. It's not adversarial. It's not competitive. Yes, there are such things as music competitions. I'm not particularly keen on them for exactly these reasons. But essentially, when you're making music, you're working with each other. And that, I think, has been taken to a new level almost by what you're trying to do with all the outreach work. And it doesn't matter that some people can play and some can't. It's an irrelevance. Actually, you're still part of that one experience. The whole idea about making music and performing music is that you are performing it to somebody else. You're generating an act of communication. I have no idea what it means. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Perhaps the meaning is in the act alone. And in the act, you have that thing which makes us human. And that, I think, you are doing in spades. I'm terribly honored, I think, to be involved in it in the slightest. I'd love to be more involved in it. Whether we can do anything over 7 time zones, I don't know. But thank you all so much for asking me to do this. And I hope everyone can relate to the idea that we are doing this as a community. The people I haven't met, but nonetheless, my contribution today is just the contribution of a performer, just exactly as would happen in a performance. We all know we've been here. We've all had that experience in our different ways. So hats off to you, and thank you for asking me.
Firstly, thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm pretty sure like everyone, like especially the heads of our JPO are very honored to hear and honored and humbled to hear you say all this, like of our organization. So yeah, thanks for all the nice comments there.
Pleasure.
All right. So yeah, with that, I think we'll move on to our Q&A section for the night. So,
Yes.
so we do have a few questions coming in from YouTube. So let's see. We have a question from Madam Jessica. I think you've talked. I think you've communicated with her a bit.
Yes, I
Yeah.
have, yes.
Yeah. So she's asked. I think you kind of did answer this a bit. In this current pandemic, how are you conducting your lessons with the orchestra, chamber music, and individual students? Are you conducting them all online, or are you actually holding some physical lessons right now?
What I'm doing online. Um, I'm not sure I've got much of a choice. I don't know if you've heard the news, but we're all shutting down again, ready for the second wave here in England. So I'm doing it online. I'm encountering some problems. I'm thinking about those problems. I'm trying to learn the new skills which are required. As you yourself know, computers are not one of them.
Uh, so yeah, we have another question from Madam Jessica. So she's asking, having accomplished so much, what are some of the plans you're looking forward to what are some plans you're looking forward to see realized in terms of music and in terms of academics?
Um, sorry again, because the transmission is not perfect, and it was one of my problems
Sorry.
in terms of teaching music. I never quite trust the sound that I get over the electronic medium, magnificent though it is. So like, I'm having the same problem there. Just say that question again. Apologies.
Sorry about that. It could be trouble on my end as well, though. So, Madam Jessica is saying, having accomplished so much, what are some of the plans you're looking forward to see realized musically and academically?
What am I looking forward to? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, basically what you're planning to see, like what are your plans that you're planning to try to realize in terms of music and in terms of academics?
To introduce more people to making music, to introduce more people to discovering it is community, it is what makes us human.
Hmm. All right. Well, thanks for that. I'm sure she's definitely very happy to hear you say that. I'm sure she has the same views as well.
Oh,
So,
good. That wasn't rehearsed. Like everyone else, that was not rehearsed.
all right. Well, yep. So we do have a few more questions coming into the chat. So, we have one from DJ Outling who, yep. So he's saying, hello. So, what is your view on listening to different genres of music and different instruments besides the one that we are mastering? I'm assuming he means like rock and pop, I suppose.
I think my interest has always been classical. I've had experience and enjoyed some pop music. I always find I'm going back to the classical particular things. But I was sort of half expecting something like that question, because if I may corrupt the question and ask it like this: what is my favorite music? I have got only one answer to that. And that is, my favorite music is the music I'm working on at the moment. No other answer is sufficient. I have to be completely professional. And actually, it doesn't mean I get less enjoyment. Taking that professional approach means I have more enjoyment. The more I do it, the more I like it, the more I like working at it. So my favorite music is the music I'm working on at the moment.
All right. So yeah. Uh, Once again, thanks for that answer. We have another question coming in from Madam Jessica now, in the on the YouTube chat as well. So she's asking, could you elaborate more on music as a healing therapeutic tool for pains or aches or um pains of the pains of that sort? Sorry.
Um, well, there is a whole branch of medicine called music therapy, which I'm probably not very qualified to talk about. I do know that there was a comment of Beethoven's, wasn't there? And he was once asked at the beginning of the Romantic period what he thought about emotions in music. Now, forgive me, I don't agree with this comment, but I say it for what it's worth, because the second part of the comment is hugely important. His initial reaction was Emotions in music, huh, that's for women. I apologize. We live in a way, in an age which I prefer, where we're not being discriminatory to 50% of the human race. So we'll ignore that bit. But I will move on to the second part of what Beethoven said. He said, for men, and in fact, let's replace the words for men with for humans, music should fire the mind. And if you get into music and you get involved in it, it is all engrossing. The brain uses 9 times the volume to process sound compared to that which it uses to process sight. It is everything to do with what we do. We're a funny animal. Human beings are funny, funny animals. We have the eyes of a hunter, the mouth of an omnivore, and the gut of a herbivore. This is strange. So what do we use the hearing for? Actually, it's our warning sense. And I once heard the leader of the Medici Quartet describe music at its best as, in performance, sophisticated danger. And it sort of sums it up. And because it's so all-engrossing, it can help all of those extra things that we know can be tapped in things such as music therapy as something which is calming, something which is stimulating. You perhaps have all heard of the Mozart effect. I'm not entirely sure everyone agrees with the conclusions of the thing that became called the Mozart effect or not, but it does have those effects. And I think that's probably why we are training our warning sense as musicians.
All right. Well, thanks. I'm sure Madam Jessica is happy with your answer there. So yeah, moving on. We have another question from an anonymous person. So they're asking, what sort of advice would you give to students on their personal development after they have finished their formal music studies in conservatories or universities?
Experience. Gain every possible experience. You never know what you're going to learn from it. Never refuse, always be professional, turn up on time, do the work. In the end, when you get involved in music, you discover that you can only really get on and like people who are also musicians. It's a terrible business. I can like people, but I only like playing with those who can really play. And those are the people with whom I can have this sort of discussion. I can't have this discussion with people I might meet down the pub. I'll have different discussions, but I can't have that sense of close trust. Being a musician is a very strange thing. You don't like people unless you think they can play. So your job to be a musician is to get every possible experience you can.
All right. Well, thanks for that. So yeah, we have another question from an anonymous person. He pretty much is asking that something I wanted to ask as well just now. So have you considered allowing for video recordings to be sent as opposed to having live video sessions? Because as you mentioned earlier, live video sessions do have a bit of a delay. So it doesn't allow you to see like the fingerings and such like that, and the audio is a bit off. So with video recordings, it should be in time as well.
So video recording for teaching
Like
purposes? Or?
like as in like your students, because as you mentioned earlier, you did have issues because of like the internet connection and stuff like that, so there is a bit of a delay in what you see and what you hear. So have you considered using video recordings where it would be in time as opposed to having live video sessions?
Okay, well, I've used video recordings for observing lessons, for example, doing professional development, because one can just have the 15-minute or half-hour video and everything happens and you see everything that happened in the lesson, and then one can take that apart. It takes a long time. You can happily spend 2 hours discussing a 15-minute lesson. So yes, that can be quite useful. I think there's an interplay between teacher and pupil where I like to retain the internet connection that, for example, you and I are having now. I think that matters. I think there has to be some degree of spontaneity. By the time you're sending it in as a video, it's a bit like sending it in as an exam. And I'm not entirely convinced I want my lessons to be like that. So whilst I've used that sort of format, I'm not sure I'd want to use it for lessons. I think a lesson has got to retain some degree of spontaneity rather than just all analysis and dissection.
Yeah, no. Well, I think that kind of answers my other question that's related to this, because as you mentioned earlier on, you did mention that it would be like preferable to have like some silent self-reflection time for each of the students, correct? Yep. Like would having a video, like would having a video recording of them playing and then them watching it with you and such like that as self-reflection, would that be too much of a distraction as opposed to having the silent self-reflection session, part of the lessons?
No, I see what the question is getting at. How about a pupil makes a video and then sits down and watches it for themselves and discovers what's wrong with it?
Oh no, this is an addition to that question. This is a question of my own. Like the previous one, you did manage to
And
settle
then,
that one.
and then the pupil sends the video and what they have thought about it to the teacher, and then the teacher and the pupil go through it, because teacher should probably be able to see, yes, you've spotted that. What about what happens at minute number 13? Is there something extra happening there? Have a look at what you've just done. And that gets the pupil aware. That increases the self-agency. Yes, that could work. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that. So yeah, I'm just trying to look through the rest of the questions as well. Uh, so yeah. Oh, okay. Yep. So I found one. So this is also coming from an anonymous person. So would you like to share with us what is your take on music exams and competitions?
Okay. We've all done them. We've all sent pupils into them, and we've all done assessments. We've all been assessed. It's a fact of life. I sort of understand it. In the end, music at its purest is not like that. I think there's a slight artificialness about a performance which is assessed as an exam. For example, if I play in front of people, I might play in front of, for example, in the piano quartet, we might play in front of 300 people. What we do, because it's an act of communication, and I think that communication goes both ways, you can sense if the audience is involved, is taken somewhere else because of the performance. That's a part of what we're playing with as musicians at that level. And I'm not sure much of that always gets repeated when you have one examiner and one candidate. It's a different and extreme form of performance that you're going to perform like that. Actually, it can bring to our attention the fact that somebody doesn't know the piece that they're playing as well as they should. It can bring to our attention that that was deserving of a bigger audience and more notice and so on. So an exam is a very specific performance. And perhaps when we're teaching, it should be regarded in its proper place, which is, to my mind, slightly subsidiary to being a performance in front of a public. Examiners are by and large, with the Associated Board, I know they're extremely highly trained. They have to pass a training every year, I think. So they hope to achieve consistency and all the rest of it, and they go through all sorts of things. They're not allowed, for example, to comment on technique. So even if you've got a violinist, they're not really allowed to comment on the technique of a violinist who might have a problem. They're allowed to say something about the musical effectiveness of what they're doing. That's legitimate. But in an attempt to get everything equal, they're not allowed to say that. But actually, maybe some of the things one is talking about in some other exam boards, they do try and attend to technique, which makes the exam a slightly different purpose. This is another spotlight on the technique, which may be something the teacher has always struggled to get the pupil to understand. And having somebody else say it might help the teacher encourage the student to attend to it. I know they exist, exams and competitions. I prefer not to worry too much about them. I don't think they're a substitute for pure performance.
All right. Well, thanks for that. We do have, I think we only have one time for one last question. So we do have one last question from Madam Jessica on YouTube as well. So she's asking, could you share some info regarding your master's program, which you had designed for the University of Liverpool?
Certainly. It always struck me that an awful lot of, particularly overseas students, and we have had some Malaysian ones and Chinese ones, obviously, as well as other people, they want to come and have a professionalization of their pre-existing skills. They've got a music degree, and they probably want to set up as an instrumental teacher. One of the things you mentioned in the introduction was that I'm this consultant for the Lavine Music School in Beijing. That was set up, amongst other things, by several people from the master's course at Liverpool. So professionalization is you have these skills, you're going to then return to China, Beijing, and you're going to start using these skills in terms of teaching. Right. Teaching is perhaps a separate subject. So let's talk about teaching. So that master's program had two core strands. One was how to practice, because an awful lot of people just think that 8 hours is twice as good as 4 hours. No, 4 hours is twice as bad as 2 hours if you're thinking during the 2 hours. And that's the secret. But it's actually exhausting doing the thinking, so the 2 hours is plenty. So then we had the teaching and the performing, because in my opinion, you can't teach unless you also do some performing, and you fail as a performer unless you do some teaching. And I have seen people who've refused to teach, and their performance level has deteriorated. I've also seen people who have refused to perform, and their teaching has become fossilized. It's become stuck. So the two in my book are symbiotic. So the program was essentially based around that. There's also some other things to get people aware of as musicians who use notation. How can we trust the notation? What are we going to do with that? And also to try and get their ears more astute in terms of a module which was comparative listening, which is, again, feeds into how we might start listening to pupils and that sort of thing. So the structure of the course originally, I think it's changed now, but now I've left university after 23 years. The original structure was practicing, performing, style, teaching, and above all, listening. It was just those components, really.
All right. Thanks for sharing all that with us. I think we've just about run out of time. Yeah, we've just about hit the like um the time limit there. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much for your responses, Tony. Sorry everyone. Sorry everyone, but we are coming to the end of tonight's broadcast. We would like to remind everyone that our JPO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. So join us next time with our next guest, who will be revealed at a later date. More details on this can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on the YouTube channel, along with the past webinars and the soon to be broadcasted interviews. So feel free to share the Zoom webinar registration link, the JPO YouTube channel, and the JPO Facebook page with your friends and family. For our YouTube audience, if you are enjoying our program, please show your support by pressing the link and the like and subscribe button down below. You guys have been an amazing audience. And if you guys do have any more questions for Tony, I've linked his email in the live chat, and I think we'll be putting it up in the YouTube description as well. So yeah, we from the JPO family wishes that everyone stays safe and healthy as we continue to face this crisis together. I will now be leading the prayer to end tonight's program. So please pray in whatever faith you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We pray that everyone in the world continues to stay strong in surviving through these difficult times, and that a solution to the virus will soon be found. We pray that governments across the world continue to improve upon their efforts and decision making so as to protect the people and curb the spread of the virus. We pray for the safety and well-being of everyone working as we approach the end of September, as we face the new surge of cases. We pray for the continued safety and morale of the frontliners who are risking their lives so that they may continue to provide for those in need. So with that, I think that concludes tonight's program. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So good night, and we hope to see you all again next time. See you.